want to welcome you to our program today. Today we have a very special guest. His name is John Schlimm. And John, thanks so much for coming and being a guest on the program today.
It is so exciting to be here. This is going to be a really fun interview.
Yeah, we really look forward to it. And John's an amazing man. He is a man just filled with so much inspiration, and he does so much. He speaks nationally. He's written books that have been sold internationally. And so I'm just going to read this little blurb on the back of, or this little bio on the back of his book, 5 Years in Heaven. But I think this describes him so well. John Schlimm is a Harvard-trained educator, an artist, and an award-winning writer. He has appeared on such national media outlets as The Ellen DeGeneres Show, Bravo's Watch What Happens Live, NPR, Martha Stewart's Living Everyday Food, The Splendid Table, QVC, and Fox and Friends. Wow, that's a pretty impressive resume when I think of. I mean, you've been on programs, that are nationally known, and so that's very impressive. And so we are pretty excited to have you here now today. And so you've been in Dubuque and working with the Schlimm Center, and you spent the week providing a lot of different programs. So why don't you just share a little bit about what this week has been for you?
This week has been so exciting. I was invited to do an author-artist residency here that was co-sponsored by the Schlimm Spirituality Center as well as Clark University. And so I've gotten to know both organizations really well and just fell in love with both of them. I've gotten to meet the most wonderful people. We've done events that have been tied into my memoir, 5 Years in Heaven. We did events that were tied into the cookbooks that I've written. Some of my participatory art pieces have been installed here this week. And what has also been great is I got to spend some time on the Clark University campus, visiting with students, which is such a passion of mine. I teach at a university back home in Pennsylvania. And so anytime I get the chance to sit down, especially with this new generation, Generation Z, they're the ones who are coming after the millennials. I'm such a fan of theirs because I see so much potential and so much talent with these young people in my classroom. So that was really exciting. But I absolutely love Dubuque. This is my first time in Iowa, but I can promise you I will be back.
Oh, good, yeah. And so I like to hear that, where you're saying, I've got confidence in this young generation.
Yes.
And, seize the time and make the most of your life. And we all are counting on you because you're the generation now that's going to be leading us here soon. And yeah, well, let's, okay, so one of the things is that you are an author, and one of the books that he has written is 5 Years in Heaven. And this is a book that can be purchased, well, basically on all the online bookstores, but also in your brick and mortar bookstores, and just about anywhere where they sell books, you can find a copy of John's book. And so why don't you just share a little bit, when was this book published?
The book came out in 2015, and it is about my 5-year friendship with an 87-year-old nun named Sister Augustine, who I met when I was 31, and I was at one of those crossroads in my life, like we all encounter many, many times. I had just finished grad school. I was working on what I hoped to be my first national book. But one rejection letter after another was coming for the book from publishers. No one would hire me, even though I had my master's degree. And so I was really at that crossroads wondering, had I made the right decision? And I had moved back home to my small little town in Pennsylvania, which is called St. Mary's, because I love small town America. And so I was really just in that state of wondering what is going on. And one day, I call it chance, but I know nothing's by chance in this world. I was led to this tiny little ceramic studio at our convent, St. Joseph Convent in St. Mary's, that happens to be the oldest Benedictine convent in the country. Oh, wow. And I met Sister Augustine there. Now, growing up there, I never knew the ceramic shop even existed there. Okay. I knew there was a gift shop, and I certainly had many of the sisters in school when I was in school, but all my life I never knew this ceramic shop was there, nor did I know Sister Augustine was there. But I met her when I needed to. And it was really love at first sight. You know, can you imagine this little nun just over 5 feet tall in traditional full habit with a denim apron smeared with paint and just the most beautiful glistening eyes. And for the next 5 years, I went and visited with her 1, 2, 3 times a week. And we talked about everything. No topic was off limits. And so that really was the inspiration behind 5 Years in Heaven.
Yeah, and so as we look at some of the chapters of this book, you know, so now each chapter, well, like chapter 2, you know, shows, you know, it's about joys and sorrows, and chapter 3 is about patience. Well, and I should mention chapter 1 in the beginning, but I guess that's always maybe. Yeah, but you got chapter 4, Forget Me Not, chapter 5, Lost and Found. Yeah, so basically every chapter then, would it be, you know, as you were working or visiting with Sister Augustine, you know, so then each chapter or each time you're visiting, you're developing inspiration that kind of went into each chapter? How best would you want to describe that inspiration, how it ended up in the book with the different chapters?
Well, you can imagine taking 5 years of visits, hundreds of visits and lessons, and having to cull that down into, you know, maybe 200 pages. So it really made me focus on what were the absolute most important lessons that she taught me. And for example, the chapter Joys and Sorrows, she would tell me every time she opened her kiln, there would be joys and sorrows in there. You know, mostly joys, but occasionally a sorrow if a piece would break. But that led to discussions about what are the joys and sorrows of life, and particularly the sorrows of life that, again, we all encounter, the tragedies, the challenges, the hardships. And she really helped me to understand how these are actually gifts that we are given. We might not see that at the time, but when we face a darkness in our life, we can use that to make ourselves stronger people and to help us move forward in a more emboldened and assured way. And so that was a really powerful lesson, because so often we don't think of the sadness as something that can be turned into anything other than tears. But she really helped me to understand to be grateful for those sorrows as I'm working through them. There's a chapter in there called Tiny Crosses. So she never liked to waste anything, not her paint nor her clay. So when she would be trimming off pieces, those trimmings, she would collect them in a pile until she had enough to roll them out. And then she had this little old tin cross cookie cutter, and she would make these beautiful little crosses that she'd put her forget-me-nots on. And so one day I was helping her roll out the dough to do that, and I asked her what the greatest lesson she had ever learned in her life. And at this point, she was probably around 90. So I knew I had asked a big question. And so she sat down and she thought for a moment, and then she said a single word: forgiveness. And that turned into this really enlightening conversation, and a beautiful conversation about the power of forgiveness. And that's what that chapter is about. And that is the chapter I hear the most about from people across the country and around the world. So it really tells me just how important that topic of forgiveness is. And you know, what she really helped me to understand is forgiveness is not meant to be easy. If it were easy, it would really be meaningless. You know, it's meant to be something that's a little difficult to work through, but there's such a great reward in working through it. And she really showed me how that when we are offering our forgiveness to someone, yes, it's a gift we're giving to them, but in many ways it's an even greater gift that we're giving to ourselves, because we're allowing that weight and that burden on our shoulders of whatever they did to us to be lifted. And so I'm so happy that so many people are finding peace in that chapter.
Yeah, so that there's a better way.
Yes.
You know, rather, you know, like when you have anger and hate, instead of going out and saying, well, how do I fight back or revenge? Or when you think about sorrow, rather than just turning that and becoming a very hardened and bittered person, you know, that there is a light that shines, there is a resurrection, and that's, I think, all of what Sister Augustine is pointing out here, or
yes,
you know, or a lot of that in those conversations is, just showing that our sorrows can be turned into a joy.
Yes, and I'm happy to say that I don't have an enemy in the world. I've certainly had people who have hurt me very deeply, but through Sister Augustine's lessons, I've been able to forgive them. And again, it wasn't easy. Sometimes I had to really concentrate on that person in my mind and what they did to me and say, I forgive you, hundreds of times. But when it finally clicked and that forgiveness finally came through me, it was the most amazing moment to have. And so all of those people, if they walked into this room right now, I would give them the biggest hug, because what I realize is whatever it was they did to me, it was actually a gift that sent me in so many different directions that I would have never gone in, and it's helped me to be a more compassionate person myself. Because, on the flip side of this, there are people we've hurt. None of us are innocent. So there are people out there who are hopefully forgiving us for what we've done. And I think that's a really humbling thing as well. So I really love the power of forgiveness and the way it allows us to make ourselves better people and to just sort of wrap that love and positive energy around other people.
Yeah. Well, that's, here again, the book is 5 Years in Heaven, and it's 5 years of having interaction and visiting with a very special person, Sister Augustine, and just how you developed a very special relationship, but also very deep spiritual insights as a result. And you just shared. I mean, your compassion or passion for life and what has happened to you, that does exude. You can just see that this is how genuine and authentic you are with that. Yeah, and so, I don't know, Joyful Mysteries. What would that be all about? Chapter 7, Joyful Mysteries.
Well, we can't give everything away, right? That's a good chapter to,
maybe I just
not give away.
Okay.
You have to read the book to get the joy.
Well, let's just keep that. Get the book and read it, and it just sounds to me like you're going to gain a real depth here, as far as reading the book. And so, by the way, congratulations on quite a masterpiece here as far as the book. And so you're a very talented, very insightful, very creative person to be able to write it all down and in a book form, but also you are an artist. And so here again, creativity. I always say, well, people, they can be inspired and they can show creativity through reading a book or singing a song or drawing a picture. And so you've been, fortunately, you've been gifted in all these areas to be able to do that. And so, like, as far as your art, you're being an artist. Here again, I think that's another way that you express, what your spirit inside is. As far as your inspiration. So, I don't know, why don't you share a little bit about that, as far as your artwork. You said you're a professor. You're a professor in?
I teach public relations courses.
Oh, public relations.
As well as freshman seminar. So, because in a previous life, I was a publicist in Washington. I did PR work as well as in Nashville and a couple other places. But I found it's even more enjoyable to be able to teach it and to be in the classroom. But all of these things that you're talking, and you're so kind in mentioning them all. They're really, they're the gifts I realize I've been given in this life, but I really love to talk to people and help them realize that we've all been given gifts, right? Sometimes people will say, well, I wish I could be a writer, I wish I could be an artist. And what I say to them is, but you have gifts in you that I probably maybe wish I could do. We all are born with tremendous gifts, and it's really up to us to figure out what those gifts are.
And discover that.
Yeah, and that's not always an easy process, right?
Yeah.
But once we do discover what it is, whether it's as a writer or as an artist, then it's about how can I use this gift? And how can I use this gift to make the world a better place for everybody. And you know, as far as the writing goes, I remember as far back as 7th and 8th grade, I was really fortunate to have some really great English teachers. And they were the first ones to say to me, "You're a pretty good writer." And so they started planting the seed of, oh, maybe this is one of the gifts I'm meant to use in this life. And it was the same thing with art and art teachers. Teachers have been very important to me. But with my artwork, you know, I started out doing primitive Americana folk art, which I write quite a bit about because it was happening while I was living these 5 years with Sister Augustine. And what was fascinating about that is I had been classically trained as an artist, but I found myself drawn to the self-taught folk artists out there who had never taken a class in their life, much like Sister Augustine, who was a fantastic artist and had never taken a class. She was self-taught. So I really had to unlearn all those classically trained techniques and really get back to just the rudimentary aspect of art. So I loved doing that. But in recent years, I have really taken my art in a more participatory direction. So I love to do participatory art pieces, which we have one of them actually right here, which I have installed in several places around the U.S., including at Shalom Spirituality Center in Dubuque, and that is my Planting Compassion piece. And what this is about, the idea is for each participant to take one of the 10 letters of compassion, find a place only they know, bury it, and let compassion grow from there. And so it's really this symbolic gesture of just those little seeds that we plant every day, or that we can plant every day, can grow into something really, really beautiful. And another one that I do is titled "The Smile That Changed the World Is Yours." And that is a big canvas that I fill with lots of black circles and 2 dots for eyes. And then I set up all different colored paints. And the participants go up and they choose their favorite colors and they add smiles and hair and glasses or whatever. And the idea there too is how something as powerful as just a little smile on your face can change not only your own demeanor, but maybe someone who's walking past you having a bad day. You know, everyone's dealing with something that we have no idea about, and something as simple as your smile or some other gesture of kindness can completely change that person's perspective. And so I'm so grateful to see that people are resonating with these and to be able to bring people into the artwork with me.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that, you know, you're able to show us, that sometimes we think we need to do something big, we need to do something major, but what you're saying, like a smile or a kind word can make a big difference in a person's life, because everybody is dealing with something in a day. And so that's, you know, what we have up here is, well, of course, the book, and then we also have, you know, the compassion. But here again, that shows just such a creativity. You know, I think about what is written in Galatians chapter 6. The Apostle Paul says that we will reap what we sow.
Yes.
And so I think that's one of the things that we have to always remember is, what kind of seeds are we sowing these days?
Absolutely.
And understanding that, well, if we are a society that's sowing the seeds of peace and the seeds of love, well, then pretty soon we will have a society of that. But if it's hate and you know, things like that, injustice, well, then pretty soon we're going to have problems.
Very true. Very true.
So that's, you know, very hands-on, practical words of wisdom and insight that John certainly has to share with us. And so with his, you know, with his art and with his writing, and well, so your book, I mean, it's been selling. Here again, this is a book that's really been selling. There's a lot of sales in the United States, but also around the world. I mean, it's not, tell us all where this book is being sold right now.
Well, you know, I really, with this project, I consider myself merely the messenger with a pen. And, you know, if people especially read the first part of the acknowledgments in the back, they'll hear the little story of how this book actually came to be, because it was almost a book that was never written. But since it has been written, I have been so touched by how it has impacted different people across the country and around the world in ways that I could have never imagined, and certainly in ways that I'm not responsible for, good ways. But there's something really powerful happening, for example, and really the main reason I'm in Iowa is shortly after it was written, I received a letter from a grandma in Iowa who you know very well, actually, and she had written to me about her 8-year-old grandson who had recently passed away from cancer. And, just an absolutely horrendous tragedy to have happen in any family. And she told me, and I was so humbled by this, how much 5 years in heaven had meant to her and her daughter, the young boy's mother. And she had sent 2 copies of the book, and in one she asked me to draw a hummingbird because that was a very special sign between her daughter and grandson. And in hers she asked me to draw a butterfly. Now, I've never drawn a butterfly or a hummingbird before. As you know, I like to draw little angels in all of the books because who wants just a silly signature? Who am I to think people want my signature? But everyone can use an angel, so I'd rather send more angels out into the world. But I thought, I need to do this for her. And so I said, Sister Augustine, because Sister loved to paint animals and birds more than anything. I said, you need to guide my hand. And so she did, and I think they turned out pretty well. But it's things like that, and it's that grandma in Iowa who ended up inviting me for the week that I've spent here all these years later. So it shows just that beautiful circle of when you put out that love and compassion, and when it's extended to you, it all comes together in beautiful ways. But I've heard from people, parents of adult children who are in the throes of drug addiction. Now, drug addiction's nowhere in this book, but there's something about the lessons Sister Augustine's talking about that resonates with these parents, and they're giving the book then to their kids, and it's helping them through that situation. I heard from a teacher in China who told me that the lessons of Sister Augustine are really informing how she's approaching her job as a young teacher. And I've really been, just so moved, really to tears so often by the responses I'm getting from China and Korea, where, Christians maybe aren't always welcome so much. They have embraced Sister Augustine in the most extraordinary way. In fact, in China, the book has gone through several different editions just over there. And that's not me. That's something much more powerful. And again, I was just the messenger. I did my job, and now it's out in the world. And I'm just loving that the readers are getting to know Sister Augustine the way I knew her. And they're getting to sit in that chair across from her and garner the lessons that they need in their lives.
Well, John, you are certainly sowing the seeds of so many wonderful things in our world right now. And when you think about what's going on in these other countries and how people are being touched, and how you see yourself as being an instrument of God's work, and that kind of reminds me a little bit about St. Francis Assisi, because one of the things that he was a person that wanted to encourage all of us to sow seeds of peace and love. But not just, just with humanity, but with all of creation, even with the animals. And I know that you've got a passion for that too, and that you are kind of an activist for all living things.
Yeah, I'm often asked, because people see in my bio activist, and I think that is a word that certainly in recent years has taken on a lot of negative connotations. And with everything I have ever done, I've tried to smash through a lot of those stereotypes. And I really don't think activism should be looked at as a bad thing. I think a lot of the things we see on TV that we're told is activism, I'm not so sure that's activism. It looks a little something a little different to me. But I think activism can be a really beautiful thing. And for me, it's all about compassion. So, I love to think of myself as a compassion activist. And that word compassion, you know, when you break it down, it's this beautiful blending of two different words, compass and passion. Compass, what is our direction in life? And passion, what are those burning gifts inside of us just waiting to get out? And what are we supposed to do with that? And I just feel that I've been, you know, so blessed in my life to not only be able to utilize the God-given talents that I've been given, but I've been presented with platforms in so many different directions, whether it's being here on this set with you, being on a set in Hollywood, you know, being just with a group in a classroom. You know, it doesn't have to be a lot of people, or it can be, you know, millions of people looking through the screen. But when you're able to connect with other people and other living beings and share that compassion and that love of the world, it's just, you know, one of the greatest things I can imagine. And certainly St. Francis is one of my favorites. And Sister Augustine adored him as well. In fact, she would just call him Francis. And I thought, well, you're the only one who can get away with just on a first name basis, because she'd always say, Francis, take care of those pieces when they go in the kiln. But she very much was in the spirit of St. Francis as well, loving the animals, and but also human beings. And of course, you know, my favorite piece of writing and speaking by St. Francis is his sermon to the birds. You know, many are the bonds that unite us. And I certainly can never pass a flock of birds without, you know, stopping and looking at them and saying, many are the bonds that unite us, and unite us not only to God, but to each other. And I just think those are such powerful words. And she really showed me the power of those bonds, whether we know the person or not. In fact, one of the things I really love to do, and especially when I'm in cities and I'm walking down the street and I see a homeless person sitting, and so often we just walk by. I mean, how many times do we just walk by? I really try to make a conscious effort to stop and to go over and to introduce myself and ask what their name is, and then ask them to pray for me. And that's something Pope Francis really taught me, because I love how at the end of his speeches, whether it's to a small group or a large group, he always asks the crowd to pray for him. And to ask someone on the street like that, who I think you can see God in their eyes, because, you know, how do we know that isn't Jesus sitting there? And you know it is. Will you please pray for me? And I've never had anyone say no. They just light up.
Wow. I'll tell you what, it's really something, you know, when we think about St. Teresa and St. Francis, and we wonder, well, who are these contemporary people today now who are people filled with inspiration to be able to write and to paint and to come up with all these innovative, how the Holy Spirit is working in and through them. And I'd say John is definitely one of those people today. And here again, the writer of this fabulous book, 5 Years in Heaven. Well, thank you so much, John, for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
What an inspiration you are. And I want to thank you for joining us this day as well.